Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Luca Troisi from Enhancers, and he's Guido, my business partner. And we have an agency, Enhancers, which operates in the field of user experience. So the presentation of today, why Android first, is a presentation in order to address some issues related with cross-platform design for different operating systems for mobile. Before starting the presentation, I'd like to introduce quickly Enhancers. So actually, we are an agency which operates, as I told you before, in the field of UX. But we believe that UX is a broader range of disciplines, not just usability. I often meet clients which think that UX is just usability. Actually, it's much more. So you can see that starting from digital strategies, usually we work on the left side, making products, so through interaction design and service design. In some other cases, more in the area of communication and launch of the product, so in the brand architecture and content marketing. But we believe that all these disciplines should work together. This is our approach. I will not go through that in details, but of course, we manage all steps of UI design, from problem understanding and vision to design, prototyping, and development. And we try to do it also always with the human beings at the center of our process. Just I would like to show you quickly a video about Enhancers. And going ahead, this is just, let's say, a small set of our clients. We work comprehensively from a startup till a very large company. And we always provide customized services for our clients. Now let's go to the presentation. So first, let's define the context. The presentation I'm having today, maybe it's useful today, but it would have been useless maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, because the main need of a client 3 years ago was to have just an app. And the only operating system was iOS. So when a client asked for an app, he meant to develop for iOS, which was the mainstream operating system. But nowadays, in the last 3, 4, 5 years, now Android is definitely the most relevant operating system, the most diffused operating system worldwide. These are quite recent research of the market share for this operating system worldwide in the last trimester of 2014. And you see that Android and iOS are the two main operating systems worldwide, and they cover over the 95% of the market. Windows Phone is trying, and the others are dying, maybe.
These are not sales, they're actually market share.
Market share.
Not sales.
No.
Okay.
Yes. And this is about Italy, of course. In Italy, actually, we have a little bit more higher presence of Windows Phone. But anyway, you see that the two main operating systems are still Android and iOS. So what's the point? The point today, the client, when they ask for an application, they ask for a cross-platform application, at least for the two main operating systems, so Android and iOS. And if the application is for a broad market, such as banking or such as retail and so on, they don't want to lose that 12% in Italy, maybe 8% in other countries. So it's quite crucial to have a strategy in order to be able to design for all platforms from the very beginning. And of course, what we do at the very beginning of every process is to take into consideration our target. So sometimes it's not always useful to design for all platforms. So for example, this is I don't know, maybe there is not enough contrast, but this is a map of New York from the top view. And these are, it's not let's say, 100% reliable statistic, but this represents every dot, the amount of tweets in a day in New York. And of course, through the API, you're able to understand if these tweets are made by Android operating system, iOS operating system, or BlackBerry operating system. So what you can see is that maybe if you're designing an application for United States, maybe iOS is more relevant than Android, and BlackBerry in the center of Manhattan is still relevant, maybe in Wall Street. That small purple area is Wall Street. Maybe is the only area where BlackBerry still is let's say, a recognizable operating system. But of course, this is a broader view of the same map, and you see that Android has got a border distribution in New York, vice versa. iOS is strongly focused on Manhattan. So it's quite crucial because sometimes we met some clients, let's say luxury car maker, they told us we care just about iOS, in some other cases just about Android and so on. So don't, even if we are speaking about cross-platform design, don't design necessarily every time for all platforms. Please, before, take into consideration your target and your market. And now there are a huge amount of information for understanding this from the very first steps. So what's the other point? Actually, from a development perspective, exist a lot of frameworks in order to optimize this problem, because it's a broad problem which goes from the conceptual stage till the launch of the product. So you have Cordoba, you have Titanium, you have Xamarin, all different frameworks with different features, but all of them are designed in order to speed up the process of development of an application. And there is already something in the market in a well-considered way about development, but nothing about design. So design is still made in a, let's say, traditional way. So now let's speak about, let's say, strategies. So if you consider the market, there are mainly 3 strategies. Of course, there are much more. The market has got, let's say, a gradient which is very, very well distributed. But when you consider the user experience related to cross-platform solution, you can identify mainly 3 strategies. The first one is operating system agnostic UI. For example, Skype. What you can notice now is that this application in the 3 different operating systems, this application is almost the same. So the same look and feel, the same design language, in some cases even the same interaction, which is quite strange for an OS user to see this kind of navigation system, which comes directly from the Windows Phone environment. So the fact that maybe you don't get so well because of the contrast, but that's a panorama hub navigation system. And I remember the first time I opened Skype on my OS, I found it quite strange, even if I knew, of course, Windows Phone. And the design language, even the font, almost everywhere the font is a Segure UI, which is the standard font for Windows Phone application. Then, if you consider another application, is for example Spotify. Again, you can see that in the 3 different operating systems, the application is always almost the same. The differences are very, very small. And again, the presence of the brand is quite strong. This strong dark background, the font, the layout, and so on. It's always almost the same. So when use OS agnostic UI, okay, of course, this is the best solution when you want to give value to your branding, to your brand. So, because in this case, you are maintaining a strong focus on your brand. You reduce costs for design and maintenance, because basically there are just small differences in the stage of preparation of assets, of slicing and so on, but actually you don't have, let's say, huge differences in the stage of designing, and designing the UX, not only the visual aspects, of course. It's not optimized, you have a not optimized user experience, what I told before. maybe for iOS user, it's quite strange to have that kind of navigation system. So maybe you cannot understand if it's a tab, if it's a main navigation system, or something else. Even the motion and so on. It's very good, I would say, for brand new markets and millennial users. I didn't consider in the example I gave, but for example, Snapchat has the same approach. Okay, Snapchat is available just on Android and on iOS. It's not available as an official application on a Windows Phone. And given that the target of Snapchat are millennials, okay, so very young people who are very, let's say, flexible in understanding and in learning UX approach, they can afford to have a brand new UI, a brand new approach, a brand new UX, which is completely different from what you can find somewhere else. And it's also a way for saying we are Snapchat and we have this approach, and if you want to interact with us, please use our approach and not something else. So it's very good, this approach, when you want to, let's say, put your brand on the pedestal. It's very common anyway also for apps owned by operating system companies. So the example I gave before, such as Skype. Skype is owned by Microsoft. Microsoft got its own mobile operating system, so they develop usually the same UX experience across different mobile operating systems for highlighting their approach. And it's the same Google does, for example, with YouTube, Google Maps, and so on. So your experience on YouTube and Google Maps on iOS, it's quite similar to the same you can have on Google phone, Android phone. So the second strategy, which is on the opposite side, is OS compliant UI. So in this case, take Evernote. Evernote has got three completely different UI and user experience across the operating system. Even the color and even the fonts and even the icons are different in the three different operating systems. So it's a way to say our goal is to make the client happy. So we don't want necessarily to highlight our brand. What we care is that you are able to accomplish your task at the best. Okay, and of course, in this way, they give people the opportunity to manage their application with the same metaphors, with the same interaction of the operating system. So you see Android, which has, for example, a flat material design UI, a main action button, a floating button. Vice versa, iOS is a little bit more, let's say, disruptive considering iOS guidelines, but anyway, it's strongly based on thin icons and a very elegant and simple design language. And Windows Phone is definitely a Windows Phone application. It's quite impossible to recognize Evernote from that screenshot if you know it's Evernote. Another case is, again, for example, WhatsApp. So again, in WhatsApp, you have three completely different applications, three different UI, and so on the right side you see that again it's very Windows Phone oriented, black background, panoramic hub, navigation system, action bar in the bottom, and so on. iOS, again, white, clean, minimal, tab bar as main navigation in the bottom, and then Android version is still made on a Halo UI, but is strongly Android biased. So this is good when, of course, this is, let's say, the most expensive way to approach the problem. You make a different design per each different operating system. So it's very expensive to design, but also to maintain, because every time the client has to manage a different has to manage a modification, a change, and so on. Maybe you have to make three different changes in three different operating systems. But on the other side, it provides the best user experience for traditional users. So if the application is not designed for millennials, for, let's say, people who are available to change their mindset every day, maybe your goal is to reach everybody, and you consider applications such as banking, for example, maybe it's good to, let's say, adopt this approach, because you have the chance to create not UX barrier in the usage of the application for these, let's say, standard and traditional users, maybe even more seniors. You could have still a reasonable branding, and it's very good for highly task-oriented application where the focus is on effectiveness more than on branding. So again, if you imagine Evernote and WhatsApp, application where the task is the center. The third scenario, of course, it stands in between. It's the hybrid version, and actually you can find, let's say, a broad gradient of solution between the two previous extreme direction. So Instagram, again, here you can see that it's hybrid because it keeps some element of the branding. For example, icons are typical of Instagram, and even in a certain sense, some element of the design languages they come from Instagram, but they also keep some element of the operating system they fit on. Another one, for example, is Facebook, and again, in a certain sense, what you can see here is, again, the icons are Facebook icons, the colors, the design language, the usage sometimes of the cards. Instead, in case of Windows Phone, they don't use cards as a UX pattern. But again, you can understand this is Facebook, maybe at the first sight, but again, there are some elements which fit the operating system, so they are, let's say, a good compromise. Just for stressing on an aspect, this example of Evernote is very extreme. They even compromised on colors because they have 3 different colors for the 3 different applications using the palette coming from the operating system guidelines. So they very compromised on UI. So when to use hybrid solution? So when you want to have, of course, a reduced effort to design and maintenance. When you want to create a good user experience for a very broad audience. When you want to maintain your branding, so brand icons, brand palette, brand fonts, and it's good for application with standard behaviors for large audience. I mean that these applications, they don't introduce brand new patterns. If you consider applications such as, again, Snapchat or Tinder or Swipe or many others, they introduce brand new pattern. At the very beginning, the learning curve is quite steep for brand new users. Instead, in this case, they don't want to introduce brand new pattern. They want to maintain, let's say, traditional pattern, simple for everybody. But of course, they want to say, we are Facebook. And so, now let's speak about, let's say, the approach. So, how to design a cross-platform solution. So actually, it's something that it's more feasible today than maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Of course, it was feasible even some years ago, but now it's much more feasible. Why? Mainly because in the past you had skeuomorphic UI. Actually, I didn't put in this slide Windows Phone, which was, let's say, actually already flat. It was the first operating system introducing a flat language, okay, with Metro UI. But in a certain sense, it remained unlistened for a certain amount of time. And so both iOS and Android went on designing solutions which were skeuomorphic. But skeuomorphism, given its peculiarities, so reflection, the cultural bias of icon, the pattern, the textures, and so on, was very hard to push a designer to find a common language for creating an integration. But luckily, let's say last year, before iOS launched iOS 7, okay, and then Android launched Materials. So in a certain sense, they changed their direction towards a flat UI, in accordance, in a certain sense, with some peculiarities, some properties, some features introduced at the very beginning by Windows Phone. So UI system based strongly on typography. So they have a strong accent on minimal typography, clean typography, the usage of grid layout, very colorful, and the usage of motion. And all these elements, you can see here Dropbox for the 3 different operating system, and in this case maybe we are in the situation of an hybrid solution. But what you can see, all of them are flat. You don't see glossy button, you don't see gradient, you don't see strange icons, you don't see strange fonts. Fonts are usually, let's say, sans serif ones, very clean, a good usage of negative spaces, so again, not overwhelmed interfaces, a strict usage of a grid, okay? And so it's, let's say, given that there is a convergence towards flat design, we have the chance now to find an even better strategy for trying to find a single way to design cross-platform solutions. So why Android first? Because material, mainly. Because now we have at least 2 operating systems, 2 UI and UX systems provided by the companies, by Google and Apple, which are flat. Before, even if Windows made the first step, it was not enough. They had a very small amount of the market. So, complete flat UI, navigation drawer. This is very crucial in our goal, because actually the most crucial element of a user experience on mobile is navigation, of course. And you have still 3 kinds of navigation in the 3 different operating systems. Android adopted the drawer menu, navigation drawer. The official guideline of iOS suggests to use bottom tab bar, because they believe that navigation drawer amber icon could hide, let's say, the architecture of the application. So every time the user has to do 2 steps in order to reach his or her goal. And the third one, which is the most peculiar, and in my opinion, maybe I don't believe it's going to live forever, is the one on Windows Phone, based on a panorama hub. So the fact that actually you don't have a screen, but you move across the viewport a broader screen, and the navigation on top suggests how to move. But the navigation drawer became, let's say, international standard. Now you can find it also in the web design. So more and more people, even if they don't use Android or they don't use iOS, they are able to recognize the hamburger icon on the upper left or in the upper right corner of the application, and they know that if they click on top of that, they can open a drawer menu. And it's quite interesting because the navigation drawer, it's very common in iOS, even if it's in a certain sense, let's say, deprecated. And in a statistic made about 1 year ago about web design, they noticed that the people using iOS were able to recognize hamburger icon and their usage in a website much better than Android and Windows Phone users. So it means that even if it's not an iOS standard, iOS users are ready to consider a iOS pattern. Cards, again, is something introduced in the latest version of Android operating system. And again, they provide the chance to arrange the information in chunks, which can be configured again in a quicker way. Even if you consider maybe different width of the screen, you have the chance to use the same card maybe with a different margin or a different padding without needing to redesign completely the UI. So maybe you have a second best, let's say, visual design solution, but still reasonably good and very fast to produce. The back button, okay, you know that the big controversy between, let's say, iOS and the other operating system, they say, please don't use the back button in your top bar because you don't need it because there is already a back button, which is an hardware button, which was, let's say, quite painful for designers because every time you have to manage that upper right corner, which is a relevant corner. You know that for a visual designer, that corner is the most evident area of a UI, and every time you have to manage that in a different way. Actually, what Android material suggests is maybe you can use both. You have a back hardware button, but why don't using a redundant back button in the upper left? And again, this is important because it allows to unify this behavior across different operating systems. Then the fact that in material, Android and Google introduced the action button, the floating action button. They create an hierarchy of button, but let's say this is quite crucial, which is very similar to what you can find in iOS in the bottom. Very often you can find in iOS a sticked button in the lower part, a fixed button in the lower part of the UI. You can use for the main action. And then typographic pop-up. If you consider the first and then the evolution of pop-up, they are becoming less and less skeuomorphic and more typographic. And again, you can find a parallelism between the three operating systems. So given this opportunity provided together by, let's say, iPhone, iOS, and Android in the recent years, now we're able to have a process where we can manage, let's say, a single process for the tree design. So, first suggestion, if you're to design, first I tell it loudly, we use a vector-based solution for designing UI, so we don't use Photoshop anymore for at least 3 years. And I believe that with the proliferation of different densities, different let's say, aspect ratio and so on, vector is much more flexible. And also it allows to maintain the size of the files reasonable when you want to share it with clients, for example. So, of course, this is our opinion. It's not, let's say, a rule, but it's our golden rule. Given that, when we design, we usually design for single density. So we always start for single density for Android and iOS. So 360 by 640 for Android, which is not always true, but let's say it's the main standard for the aspect for the factor form, and 320 by 568 for iOS. That actually they maintain the same aspect ratio. So it's just a matter of PPI when you have to export asset. So why it's crucial to work in single density and then manage asset with by 2 or by 3 double density, triple density exportation. Because now, actually, even if I work every day with application, it's a mess to understand how many PPI every application or every hardware has got. So it's quite impossible, 326, 186, 400, and so on. So if you work single density, it's much simpler to export double, triple, or 1. By 1.5, by 2.5 version of icons and assets. Second point, use drawer menus every time, even for iOS and even for Windows Phone. Why I say this? Because and even if it's not, let's say, a suggested navigation system for iOS and Windows Phone, it's very common. Everybody, almost everybody, knows that. And the tab bar in the bottom that iOS goes on supporting is good if you have a small application with few tasks and so on, but given to you to design also for scalability. Maybe the client after 6 months come back to you and ask for adding 2 new features. If you are working with a tab bar solution, again, you can put the ellipses in the bottom, but the ellipses are nothing else than a drawer menu, but it's a second best solution to me. Instead, if you begin with a drawer menu, again, it's simple, everybody knows it, it's flexible, and in every operating system you can use it. Second point, don't use operating system font. Why I say this? Because you know that Android uses Roboto, iOS uses Helvetica Neue, and Windows Phone uses Segoe. But what you see here are the same sentence, same length, same size, so 50 pixel, 50 pixel, 50 pixel, same leading, but you see that you have 3 different occupation of the space. And maybe if you consider the difference between the first Android and Windows Phone, in this case, the last word is consecutive. In that case, the last sentence is addition, okay? So it means that if you have a title, maybe when you change the font for being consistent with your operating system, you have to change your typography completely. And given that these operating systems are strongly based on typography, it means that you spend hours and days just for fine-tuning typography, okay? Which means days and not hours in most of cases. Maybe if you work with style typography, you can take less, but I repeat, you have already to manage different aspect ratio. Don't waste time managing also different typography. And on the other side, if you use your own font, you have the chance to give a stronger focus to your brand. So if your brand uses, for example, Museo, or uses, for example, Railway, or whatever, or Montserrat, or whatever it is, at least you will have a consistent usage of the font across the whole UI. The same for icons. Again, spending time for managing icons is very expensive in the assenting stage, because you have to export 3 different sets, maybe in many different densities, for the 3 different operating systems. So the developer will ask you much more. So it's a triple job. So in that case, build your own icon set, or maybe use an existing icon set and try to find the best icon set which fit your design language. So maybe if you used a thin, sans serif, and clean typography, maybe you can use thin, ghost outline icons. Or maybe if you use the bold language, strong, maybe you can use solid icons. But be consistent and create your own icon set. The same with palette. I remember that before I showcased the Evernote solution, and you noticed that they used 3 different greens for fulfilling the requirements expressed within the 3 different operating systems. Okay, this is not maybe the most significant tactic to put in practice, but again, if you create your own palette, you prevent people from having the feeling to have in front of them to use an Android or, let's say, iOS application. Instead, they have the feeling to use your application. You imagine the yellow of Snapchat. Okay, it's so strong that everybody knows when they see the yellow, it's Snapchat. Okay, it's strong usage of colors. Build the contents into cards. Try, of course, it's not always possible, I know, but again, arranging contents into cards, it's something very common now in Android is a guideline, but in iOS it's very common as well. A lot of, let's say, important companies are using cards as a UX pattern. So consider Pinterest or Tinder and so on. So why don't using cards across your UI? In this case, it's not exactly the same, but you can fit the requirement of arranging the content in tiles in Windows Phone. So again, using cards as aggregator of content, it's a good strategy for reducing the variation across different operating system. Then again, use floating bottom. Okay, we actually differentiate floating bottom from Android to iOS to Windows Phone. Sometimes it's even possible to use the same round floating button even for iOS and for Windows Phone, but maybe actually it's too strong. Now it's an element of recognition for material UI. So maybe you are telling too loudly that you are starting from Android. So maybe the good strategy you can approach is just transforming that button in a fixed button in the lower corner, maintaining the same usage, maintaining the same aspect. Okay, so these are all strategies we put in practice in order to create a very quick process. Now I'm gonna show you a very quick video we made for this presentation. So what you see here, I commented before just because it lasts just 30 seconds, is a UI designed for Android, so Android first, okay, based on material. And now you see that in which way it becomes for iOS very quickly. And what we have done is to use what we told before. So our own font, our own icon set, using cards. It's quite simple now because you can so you can transform, and now you see that you know the story, you see them without the font around, without the frame around, but maybe pushing the color even more. I can tell you that maybe a traditional common iOS user can think this is a UI designed specifically for iOS, and they are almost the same, and they require maybe just 10% or 50% of your design time for adapting. Okay? Oops. And that's it. Thank you.